Everyone know about British monarchy. From the glitz and glamour to the scandals that keep the tabloids buzzing, it's like a real-life soap opera. And many people were very happy to buy those stories, even those outside the British Empire. But I bet that not many people know about the sins and bloodshed by the British Empire on this earth. Sure, we know about the lavish lifestyle, the wealth, and those majestic palaces that look straight out of a fairy tale, literally. But the truth is, behind all the shimmering facade lies some really dark secrets. We're talking about the sins of the British royal family. And trust me, they're not pretty. Have you ever asked why the British Empire could have so much power and authority? Or where did they get all that astonishing wealth? See, the British Empire didn't just rise to power on rainbows and sunshine. Of course not. It was all built on the backs of millions of innocent people, stepping on them and using them as tools, literally. Millions of innocent lives were lost, and countless more suffered so the royals could live their extravagant lives. And if you think that, hey, that's all ancient history, right? You're very wrong. The echoes of that dark past still haunt us today. The conflicts and bloodshed unleashed by the British Empire continue to shape our world, and these are the sins of the British Empire. Now, when I say England ruled the world, I'm not even kidding about it. Back in the day, during the height of the British Empire, they were absolute powerhouses. The world's greatest ruler. Literally, when you look at a map of England today, it might not seem all that special, right? Looks the same as other countries in the world. But there's a whole lot more to it than meets the eye. You see, the British Empire didn't just control England. They had their hands in 14 other regions around the globe, apart from England itself. And if you look more carefully, you'll see that the area controlled by the British Empire stretches all over the world. These territories are remnants of the glory days of British colonialism, which reached its peak in 1921. But how did they pull it off? It all started back in 1550, under the reign of King Henry VII. Although England wasn't the first to venture into exploring new lands. Spain and Portugal do it first. But when they saw the success those guys were having, and they jumped right in, things really started to heat up in the 17th century with the rise of trading companies like the British East India Company. They set up shop in India and started raking in the cash. The establishment of the British East India Company in India served as a catalyst and stepping stone for the British Empire to conquer and dominate other regions in Asia. Consequently, the British Empire reaped extraordinary economic benefits as the production and trade of British companies surged rapidly. But they weren't just in it for the money. These guys were playing the long game, spreading their culture and politics far and wide. With all that sweet cash rolling in, they beefed up their military and started snatching up territories left and right. They even took on other European powers' territory like the Netherlands, Portugal, and even Spain. They're not playing around. Take a look at America, for example. The Brits rolled up in 1607, planted their flag in Virginia, and never looked back. They even swiped New Amsterdam from the Dutch and renamed it New York. That's some serious boss moves right there. For perspective, by 1912, a staggering 400 million people were living under the British Empire's rule. If you think it's a lot and impressive, you need to hear this. By the 1920s, they had control over nearly a quarter of the entire planet. That's what I call domination. They practically had the world in their pocket. So, when I say the British Empire was the greatest ruler of the world, I ain't kidding. Now, you've heard about the British Empire's massive success, right? If you ask the British Empire, or even history books, they're often praised for their industrial prowess and technological advancements. But let me tell you something they don't want you to know. Slavery. Yep, the British Empire's economic boom was fueled by the blood, sweat, and tears of millions of African slaves. Let's break it down. Back in the day, the British Empire set up this twisted trade route called the triangular trade. Here's how it went down. They'd ship off their industrial goods like textiles, bread, or alcohol to Africa, and then trade them for millions of African, and then ship those people as slaves to America to work on plantations. The results from these plantations would then be sent back to the British Empire and processed into finished products such as textiles. Then, the processed product would be sent back to Africa to repeat the same process. This trade triangle provided extraordinary benefits for the British Empire, giving it the ability to increase its industrial capacity, machines, and even military strength. While the British Empire enjoyed the fruits of their triangular trade system, can you imagine the fate of the enslaved Africans? Films such as 12 Years of Slavery, Django Unchained, and Emancipation provide a specific picture of what the sad fate of these slaves was like. They were treated like property, not like people, literally. In fact, sometimes, animals were treated better than them. They were left starving and dehydrated, forced to work like machines. If they rebelled, they would be whipped, tortured, and even killed. Now, let's not forget about the fact that these European rulers didn't even see these African people as human beings. Nope, they were just commodities to them. And you know what's even more messed up? There were no laws to stop this cruelty because, well, the people in power were benefiting from it. Don't ask about the victims, because they are all victims. While the British Empire was raking in the cash from this trade, millions of Africans were suffering and dying. It's estimated that between the 16th and 19th centuries, British ships transported around 3.4 million Africans to America and Europe as slaves. And sadly, around 450,000 of them died on the journey due to horrendous conditions. They called it the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, according to Britannica, overall there were around 10 million to 12 million Africans who were sent as slaves, and 2 million of them died during the journey. Spain and Portugal were also part of this transatlantic slave trade, with the British Empire leading in this slave trade practice. So, when we talk about the success of the British Empire, I can say that the success of the British Empire at that time rested and stood on the blood, sweat, and lives of 12 million African slaves. That's the harsh truth, my friends. And if you think that's bad enough, don't forget that the spread of British rule throughout the world was based on colonization and the forcible taking of local communities' territories. Dozens of countries across the globe were colonized, and it wasn't just about enslaving people. Oh no, civilians shed their blood too. Take the Amritsar massacre in India, for example. On April 13, 1919, protesters were trapped inside the Jallianwala Gardens and fired upon by Gurkha soldiers. It was brutal, with between 379 and 1,000 protesters killed, and another 1,100 injured in just 10 minutes. And guess what? Brigadier Reginald Dyer, the man behind it all, was hailed as a hero back in Britain. They even raised £26,000 for him as a thank you. Talk about messed up, right? And let's talk about the Great Famine in India. Around 12 to 29 million Indians died of starvation while under British control, all because millions of tons of wheat were being shipped off to Britain while famine ravaged India. And get this, during the Bengal famine in 1943, approximately 4 million Bengalis died because Winston Churchill diverted food to British soldiers and other countries. And if that's not enough, Churchill had the audacity to blame the Indians themselves, saying, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion. The famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits." Can you believe that? And that's just scratching the surface. British colonialism also left behind a legacy of bloodshed and ongoing conflicts in its former colonies. Fast forward to today, and even though the British Empire is long gone, the legacy of conflict they left behind still haunts their former colonies. Take the Kashmir region, for example. It's this hotbed of tension squeezed between India and Pakistan, with both countries fighting over it for more than half a century. Can you imagine that? And it all goes back to the haphazard division of territory by the British colonial government. Kashmir is an area inhabited by Hindu and Muslim communities, and is a bone of contention between India and Pakistan. The two nuclear-armed countries have fought several wars over the Himalayan region since partition in 1947. and each country controls parts of Kashmir, with India controlling approximately 55% of the land area. Pakistan controls approximately 30% of the land area, and China controls the remaining 15%. As I said before, the root cause is the haphazard division of territory by the British colonial government, which previously controlled these areas. After the Second World War broke out, the British colonial colonies began to become unstable, and rebellions began to occur, one of which was in South Asia. As a solution, England created the Partition of India, dividing the region into 3 parts based on religious differences: India for the majority Hindu population, and West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which we now know as Bangladesh, as a country with a majority Muslim population. However, instead of being a solution, this division actually damaged the societal order of Indian society, which previously lived peacefully in full diversity. When the British lost power completely and left India, the situation became even more chaotic, with militant groups taking over as happened in Kashmir. Civil war broke out, and casualties increased. And if you think this separation was carried out by the British with good intentions, you are very wrong. This was a typical British strategy to create divisions in the local area to perpetuate its power in that region. Or should we say, divide et impera, or divide and conquer. But it gets even crazier. Ever heard of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar? These guys have been facing persecution and even having their citizenship revoked by the government of Myanmar. And guess what? You can trace it all back to, you guessed it, British colonial rule. See, back in the day, the British moved Bengali Muslims into the Rakhine region, which was predominantly Buddhist, to work as agricultural laborers. They even gave the Muslims strategic government positions, sparking tensions with the local Buddhist community. Fast forward to World War II, and things get even messier. The Rohingya Muslims backed the British, while the indigenous Rakhine people sided with Japan. Coupled with Japan's defeat in Rakhine, the position of the Buddhist community in Rakhine became increasingly marginalized, with England giving strategic positions in government to Bengali Muslims. It was a recipe for disaster. Later, after Burma gained independence from Britain, the tensions boiled over, and the Buddhist community in Rakhine kicked out the Bengali Muslims, leading to years of oppression and persecution. And to top it off, the Rohingya Muslims have had their citizenship stripped away, and now Rohingya are one of the world's largest stateless populations. The law also restricts the Rohingyas' access to state education, civil service jobs, and freedom of movement, leaving their fate uncertain. And let me tell you, the biggest conflict currently between Israel and Palestine cannot be separated from the role of Britain. Back in the day, Palestine was under Ottoman rule, and people of all religions lived peacefully together. But then World War I happened, and the Ottoman Empire was on the losing side. So guess who swooped in to take control? You got it, England. In 1917, the British government dropped a bombshell known as the Balfour Declaration. Basically, they promised to support the Jewish community in creating a homeland in new land, which is Palestine. The thing is, Palestine was already home to millions of Muslims and Christians. And if you think that this situation will not lead to conflict, time has shown that this British policy ultimately created conflict that was detrimental to civil society. Fast forward to today, and we're still dealing with the fallout. The mass evictions of Palestinian civilians, known as the Nakba, were just the beginning. Over time, more and more Palestinians were pushed out of their own land, and the conflict only escalated from there. I've got a special video all about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. You can check it. But here's the thing. This wasn't some random series of events, and it is impossible to think that all this is just a random coincidence. This was a direct result of British policy, and it's had devastating consequences for civil society. All right, let's talk about something that's been on my mind lately: the British royal family. We see them living their lavish lifestyles, surrounded by elegance and luxury, right? But have you ever stopped to think about where all that came from? How much innocent blood was shed to build that empire of wealth and power? And the crazy thing is, that bloodshed isn't just a thing of the past. It's still happening today. It's a harsh reality, but one we can't ignore. So, how long will the world feel the bitter legacy of the British Empire? That's the big question, and honestly, only time will tell. But I want to hear from you. Do you agree with me, or do you have a different perspective? Let's have a healthy discussion down in the comments. And hey, if you're British or living in a Commonwealth country, I'd love to hear your take on this too. Now let's move to the comments section. Until next time, peace.